Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the UW System Board of Regents. Glad to have you with us today. Megan, please call the roll.
Regent President Walsh.
Here.
Regent Vice President Bogus.
Here.
Regent Adams.
Present.
Regent Atwell.
Here.
Regent Frankus.
Here.
Regent Cologne.
Here.
Regent Jones.
Here.
Regent Cruiser.
Present.
Regent Manydeeds.
Here.
Regent Miller.
Here.
Regent Peterson.
Here.
Regent Prince.
Present.
Regent Rye.
Here.
Regent Staton. Regent Tyler.
Here.
Regent Underling. Regent Walks.
Here.
Regent Weatherly.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any regions who have a conflict with any of the items on our agenda today? If so, please let us know. Okay, seeing none, we will proceed. Again, welcome to the meeting. The role of system president will briefly be played by the board president. So I ask for your indulgence. So we have some changes coming up that we wanted to give some recognition here today. UW-Eau Claire in particular, in its provost and vice chancellor for student affairs office, we'd like to recognize those new roles. As was announced earlier this year, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Patricia Klein, will be retiring in July 2024. As part of the planned step transition, she continued to serve in that role this fall, and then in January, she will step away to lead a number of other significant initiatives on campus. And Mike Carney, currently professor and interim assistant chancellor for strategic partnerships and program development, will serve as interim vice chancellor and provost until summer of 2025, when UW-Eau Claire expects to hire a new permanent provost. The upshot is that Pat will be around until the end of the academic year, and Mike will step up as a seasoned leader to oversee the transition.
Excellent. I'm sure I'm going to get marked down for being tardy, so I apologize for that. Good afternoon, everyone. In other news from UW-La Crosse, Dr. Bob Hetzel has announced that he intends to retire as Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance at the end of the current academic year. Bob has served at UWL for 17 years, and Chancellor Gao credits his, quote, dedicated and wise fiscal stewardship, end quote, for the university's continued financial strength despite challenging times. Pointing to the significant building projects that were completed under Bob's tenure, Chancellor Gao goes on to say, and I quote, "I think it is safe to say that no other individual in the history of our school has had such an important and lasting impact on our campuses," end quote. We will have more to say closer to Bob's actual retirement, but we'd like to take this opportunity to thank him for all he has done. I'm not sure if Bob is here today or not. He is watching, so Bob, please be recognized. And with that, President Walsh, back to you.
Okay. The records of the November 9th, 2023 regular meeting and December 1st, 2023 special meeting of the UW System Board of Regents have been provided. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as distributed. A report from the Wisconsin Technical College System Board has also been provided. Are there any comments or questions at this time about that report? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward. To open my report, I'd like to give a brief update on our search for Chancellor Joe Gao's successor at UW-La Crosse. The national search officially opened last month. The deadline to submit nominations and applications for full consideration is January 2nd. In the meantime, listening sessions were recently held on the La Crosse campus to give an opportunity for students, faculty, staff, and community members to share what qualities they would like to see in candidates for UW-La Crosse's next chancellor. This feedback will help inform the work of the Search and Screen Committee, which is led by Vice Chair Professor Enilda Delgado, along with Regent Ashok Rai as chair. Regent Rai, would you like to give any comments on the search?
No, I'm very excited to see the candidates. Nothing to add, but we're very excited to see the candidates. And I really do want to thank all the regents that participated and as well as the staff and faculty and the community members that participated in the listening sessions. They were very valuable.
Great, thank you. And thank you again to everyone who's agreed to serve on that search committee. Turning now to our Regents Business Partnership Awards. Last week, UW Stevens Point and Century were presented with awards to recognize their long, productive, and mutually beneficial relationship. Regent Vice President Bogus took part in the presentation, and I now invite her to say a few words.
Thank you, Regent President Walsh. It was really quite an amazing event. The CEO, Pete McPartland from Century Insurance, couldn't have been more positive with the long-standing relationship that Century Insurance has with UW Stevens Point. And when we say long relationship between Century and the university, we're talking more than 6 decades. The impact on the students, the faculty, the staff, and the communities has really been transformative. Century has committed record-setting gifts to support UW Stevens Point in starting a data analytics program, and most recently, the Century School of Business and Economics. Over the years, Century and its foundation have also funded scholarships for hundreds of students, helping those who need financial support to access a college education. But their partnership goes beyond what might be considered more traditional support. Consider this: in the middle of Schmeickel Reserve, I hope I'm saying that right, UW Stevens Point outdoor classroom, there is now Lake Jonas, which was created when Century dug out the fill needed for their new headquarters, a new place to relax and enjoy the outdoors. Century also created the Century Invitation to the Arts program, in which students learn directly from artistic greats like Yo-Yo Ma, Mandy Patinkin, Wynton Marsalis, and many, many more. It's a very, very solid relationship with help of Chancellor Gibson, who's done such a fantastic job with those relationships. It's pretty incredible. There are several hundred people at the event, which is really wonderful, and it was at the Century grounds. And Century has continuously demonstrated its belief that a strong university is key to developing a talented pipeline and a vibrant community for the future. Their commitment benefits the entire region and frankly, the entire state. So much congratulations to Century and Chancellor Gibson and the entire Pointer community. Thank you all so much. Back to you, President Walsh.
Thank you, Regent Vice President Bogus. And I also want to thank the campuses who, for whom we've already done presentations for the Regents Business Partner Award. We knew there were a lot of amazing stories out there, and we've certainly gotten them through this program. And so we're really grateful for the work that your folks have put into that. We look forward to highlighting more examples of how the universities of Wisconsin are building strong relationships with business in support of our students and communities. Now for an update on a subject I suspect you know is near and dear to me. Several weeks ago, President Rothman and I had the pleasure and the privilege to be part of the ribbon cutting for the expansion of the University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine here on campus. There we are with big scissors. The University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine is consistently ranked in the top 10 around the country with good reason. It's earned a reputation for providing outstanding programs in veterinary medical education, research, clinical practice, and service that enhance the health and welfare of both animals and people and contribute to the well-being of the state of Wisconsin and well beyond. The need to grow this enterprise has been significant. The previous facility was built to accommodate about 12,000 patient visits per year. Today, the School of Veterinary Medicine sees more than double that number of patients. Projections suggest that demand could even triple before long. The plain fact was that the school had run out of space to meet the research and practical needs of the faculty. Having state-of-the-art facilities is essential to the work the school performs. Even more essential are the people who will do that work in this new facility. That's the real story. This new school will help us attract and retain the best faculty and staff and give students an even greater opportunity to be the next generation of leaders in veterinary medicine. And now just a smidgen of athletic accomplishments. I'd like to share some of those that are very impressive. First, with strong performances from current and former UW Whitewater student athletes. The Team USA wheelchair basketball men's and women's teams each captured a gold medal recently at the Parapan American Games in Santiago, Chile. With the wins, both teams have earned spots in the 2024 Paralympic Games next summer in Paris, France. UW Whitewater is recognized for exceptional programming and outcomes for students with disabilities. The Warhawk men's and women's wheelchair basketball teams are club sports that compete nationally. The Warhawk men's team has won 13 national titles since 1982, while the women have claimed 3 national titles. And now several current and former Warhawks play a role for Team USA. Congratulations. Meanwhile, UW Oshkosh's women's volleyball team also made a splash nationally, making it to the Elite Eight at the NCAA tournament last week in Claremont, California. And there they are. In the end, the Titans were defeated in their quarterfinal match by Claremont Mud Scripps, but their overall season was extremely impressive. In fact, they started out the season with 34 straight wins, breaking the program's previous win streak of 29 set in 2009. Congratulations, Titans. We're already looking forward to next season. The end of the year is often a very busy time, but it's also an exciting time, especially for our many students. In the coming weeks, about 10,000 students all around the universities of Wisconsin are expected to receive their hard-earned UW degrees. These graduates are the workers, the leaders, and the innovators who will define the economy and culture of this great state moving forward. And the education they received at one of our UW universities has prepared them well. Congratulations to the class of 2023. I wish you great success. And thank you to the faculty, staff, university communities, and families who supported these students as they progressed through their UW experience. We know you played a key role in helping these 10,000 success stories happen. Several regents, as well as President Rothman, will be participating in various UW commencements around the state this month. And let me tell you, if you haven't yet had the pleasure, it's truly a special moment to be part of. All right, I did want to make one comment about the group of our regents who were recently confirmed. We're very appreciative that the vote took place. These are folks who are community volunteers. Every one of us at this table along those sides are in these positions voluntarily for 7 years. And it takes usually a year, maybe 2, to get up to speed as a regent because it's a pretty complex world. So we really appreciate the vote of confidence, and we hope that the 4 remaining regents who have not been confirmed will be confirmed very soon. And that concludes my report. President Rothman, take it away.
Thank you very much, Regent President Walsh. And please allow me to extend my congratulations to the class of 2023 as well for a great journey. And we certainly wish them all the success in the world. And I certainly echo President Walsh in saying what an honor it is to be part of those celebrations, because that's really what they are. They are truly celebrations, a celebration of the commitments to our students' success, a commitment made by our students, their families, and our university community. So congratulations. Just would like to offer an update. We are continuing in our discussions with the legislature to see if we can find a path forward, and we will continue to update that. There are some critical issues, including pay plan and some capital buildings that I think are important to our university long-term. And we are hopeful that we will reach a successful conclusion of those discussions. As part of our continuing efforts to advocate on behalf of our universities of Wisconsin, we made 2 more stops on our opportunity tour this past month, first at UW Platteville and then at UW Stevens Point. Both campuses have strong support in their local areas from the business community, and we ask those leaders to help us build support in the public and in the legislature for our universities. I was heartened by the response we received at each visit, and I am excited about the partnerships that we are building with the business community and the civic leadership throughout the state. We also had the opportunity to meet with faculty and staff from each of our universities, and as always, I really come away impressed with their passion and commitment to student success. One of the things coming out of the private sector that has so impressed me about our universities is the commitment of our faculty and faculty and staff to seeing those students stay in school and graduate. And I am so pleased to see that as I go around. I also told them what is happening relative to our pay plan. In my judgment, is wrong, and we are doing everything in our power to get those funds released, because it is having an impact on morale among our faculty and staff throughout our universities. One additional note, as mentioned by President Walsh and also Vice President Bogus during our visit to Stevens Point, the Regents presented UW Stevens Point and Century with the Regents Business Partnership Awards. I want you to take a look at this photo. As you can see, there was a very impressive crowd of about 400 people on hand for the presentation, which was held at Century World. And all of those people with their hands raised, as you can see right now, they have one thing in common. Anybody have an idea what that might be? They are all alums of UW Stevens Point. So you can see the importance of our university in Stevens Point, that it has on a great company that has nationwide presence with Century. That is clearly a partnership that we value, and I know Century values as well. And while we're on the subject of good things happening on our campuses, I'd like to briefly share some other significant accomplishments at 3 of our universities. First up, UW Stout has received a $2.5 million award over 5 years from the U.S. Department of Education to help the Polytechnic University expand its ability to serve students, especially low-income, first-generation, and transfer students. UW Stout's STRONG program, with STRONG standing for Strategic, Technology, Retention, and Organizational Networks and Guidance. Somebody spent some time coming up with that one, Chancellor Frank. Will be focused on improved academic advising, a new first-year experience program to help students successfully transition into college, a financial wellness center on campus, and enhanced mental health strategies. I'd like to extend my congratulations to Chancellor Frank and the entire UW Stout campus community on the award of this grant. So thank you, Catherine. Secondly, last month, UW Oshkosh launched a new school of informatics where students learn how to better understand and apply cutting-edge technology to help solve workforce challenges. You might ask what this is all about. And think AI, think cybersecurity, think augmented reality, to name just a few. College of Business Dean Frank Braun, who championed creation of the school, describes informatics as the art, science, technology, and business of transforming data into useful knowledge. This new school will not be housed in a traditional brick and mortar building, but rather serves as an umbrella to bring together multidisciplinary programs focusing on making information more accessible, accurate, impactful, and secure. It really is an interesting and novel approach to education. So my congratulations to Chancellor Levitt and the entire UW Oshkosh campus community. And third, I'm delighted to share the news that UW Madison, for the first time, has topped the $1.5 billion amount in research expenditures, according to the National Science Foundation. With this accomplishment, UW Madison is ranked 8th among the nearly 900 public and private universities surveyed by NSF. 8th out of 900. That is quite a research engine. NSF's higher education research and development data show a 10% increase in research expenditures at our flagship over the previous year, or more than $143 million between July 2021 and the end of June 2022. UW Madison has reported $1.52 billion in total research expenditures, about half of which comes from federal awards. And as the Regents may remember, one of the key components of the strategic plan is being in a position to support Madison to do even better than that. No pressure, Chancellor Mnuchin, but with that, I'd like to congratulate you and your entire team on a significant accomplishment. Congratulations. Now, continuing on our regular reports to the board on implementing the strategic plan, later this afternoon, we will have a presentation and discussion on expanding our efforts around freedom of expression and civil dialogue. And we are privileged to have a number of legislators with us today, and we thank you for your presence. As part of our commitment to foster civic engagement and to serve the public good, our strategic plan explicitly calls for the universities of Wisconsin, and I quote, to champion the democratic principles of free expression, academic freedom, and civil discourse, end quote. And that's contained in Strategy 4. We are doing important work in this area on a variety of fronts, and I am proud of the efforts that we have made so far in fulfilling that plank of the strategic plan. Presentation this afternoon, the discussion that will be coming up in just a few minutes, so we can look forward to learning more and what I hope will be an interesting and civil dialogue among everyone here today. Meanwhile, in the Education Committee this morning, there was a presentation on strategies to support and strategies and support to increase student retention. Reflecting our commitment to champion student success across the higher education lifestyle, as contained in Strategy 2 of the strategic plan, we heard from provosts, student affairs officers, and importantly, students from 3 of our universities about the positive impact that strategies that our universities are employing on having them stay in school. On a related note, tomorrow morning before this full board, we will hear an overview of the EAB Navigate Student Success Management System. Again, these are all efforts to support student success and ensure after we recruited great students, we ensure that we retain them and graduate them. I hope you're noticing a theme. If you want to know where we are focusing our attention within the administration at the universities of Wisconsin, it is fulfilling the strategic plan that this board adopted last December. I know higher education from time to time gets a bad rap for being stodgy and unwilling or unable to change. I don't believe that is the universities of Wisconsin. It should be clear from the priorities and strategies we're implementing that this board approved. We have a well thought out plan to ensure our universities are in a position to be sustainable and viable and successful for the future. A plan that we will ensure that we continue to serve students now and for generations to come, while at the same time addressing the most pressing needs of the state of Wisconsin. To succeed, the universities of Wisconsin are willing and able to change, to pivot, to adjust when necessary to meet evolving trends and demands. The strategic plan is our roadmap to achieve our ultimate goals. Finally, I'd really like to take this opportunity to express how much I appreciate the exemplary work being done on our campuses all across the state. By the leadership on those campuses, by our faculty, our staff, and our university communities, and by our friends, and also to this Board of Regents for their support and their dedication to the vision. We have faced considerable hurdles this past year, and I think we will continue to face hurdles going forward, but that's part of the deal. But I am proud to say I believe we have shown strength and resiliency in the face of those challenges and a commitment to our mission, to our students and to the state of Wisconsin that will not be denied. I encourage you to consider the collective impact on all of our lives and how our lives have been changed by higher education. It changes the trajectory of people's lives, and not only of the individuals, but of their families, which has a multi-generational impact in the communities in which they reside. That is something that's very personal to us in the universities of Wisconsin and is closely aligned with our mission to improve and enhance life in the state of Wisconsin. I thank all of you involved in helping us fulfill our mission. And with that, President Walsh, back to you.
Thank you very much, President Rothman. And now we will turn to a topic that has generated a lot of attention nationwide, and that's universities' promotion of civil discourse and freedom of expression. As a journalism graduate, I often say that we can assume sometimes that everyone is simply born knowing what their First Amendment rights are, but also the responsibilities that people have to support the First Amendment. It's not just having the right, it's understanding it, and having that knowledge is really the foundation that we want to encourage to develop with the programs that we're working on. And there's exciting stuff going on. We're going to start today's discussion with presentation of the annual report on academic freedom and freedom of expression. That will be followed by a brief presentation led by the newly formed Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue. And then we'll hear from two of our chancellors, UW-Madison's Chancellor Mnookin and UW Superior's Chancellor Wachter, on efforts being undertaken on their respective campuses in these areas. I would now like to invite our friends in the legislature who have been kind enough to come down and see us today to please come and take a seat at the table. We'll get all your name cards squared away. Are there enough chairs?
That's our. This one's open. Or should we move? I'll move down.
Slide down.
I know you do. My style.
Wow, it's really great to have so many of you here today. I wonder if we could quickly go around and please introduce yourself and tell us where you live in the district that you represent. We'll start over here on my left. Oh, and yeah, you have to talk right into these mics. Pretend you're giving the news on
Okay,
NPR.
thank you. Hi, I'm Jody Emerson. I'm a representative from the Eau Claire area.
Chris Larson, representing the southeast corner of Milwaukee County. UW Milwaukee is the campus in my district.
All the way down to me.
Yeah.
On that side. I'm can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm State Representative Dave Murphy. I represent the 56th Assembly District in the Fox Valley. I am the chairman of the Colleges and Universities Committee in the State Assembly, and I'm not doing my Michael Jackson impersonation today. I had hand surgery about a week ago, and thank so many of you that gave me good wishes towards a speedy recovery.
Yes, not to mention, don't forget to do your PT, but we'll talk about
Doing
that
my,
later.
yeah, if you catch me doing this,
Okay, you're excused.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Nedweski. I'm the state representative for Assembly District 61 in Kenosha County. So that's pretty much everything in Kenosha County that's not the city, and also the town of Wheatland. So down in the southeast corner. I am new to the Assembly this year. I am the vice chair of the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities, and recently worked on a revised and refreshed version of the Free Speech on Campus bill with Chairman Murphy.
Very good.
Sorry. Well, I'll try to speak loud. So I'm Representative Bob Whitkey. I'm a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And I also have two children in the system, one at UW Eau Claire, one at UW Milwaukee. I represent the 62nd Assembly District, which is obviously the best district in the state, Northern Racine County, and I stretch all the way from town of Waterford all the way through to the lake, the village of Wind Point. And beyond that, I'm also a member, besides colleges and universities and K through 12 education, I serve on the building commission. So with a lot of people in this room, I'm very popular.
Very good. And we have a couple of other friends who are not from the legislature. Would you mind introducing yourselves, please?
I'm Eric Giordano, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, also known as WIPS, and it's a unit of the universities of Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Scheel, Professor Emeritus at UW Stout, and I am the part-time interim director of the Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue, also known as WICKED, in a good way.
Okay, that almost calls for a song if you're going to invoke Wicked. Yes, before we turn to today's discussion, I want to share a few. Oh, this is actually you. Never mind.
That is me. I'll share a few words, and I'll just remind Representative Whitkey that with his children, that not only do we offer undergraduate programs, there are a number of graduate programs that I'm sure your children would appreciate. So we appreciate all of you being here today.
I need parking.
Parking. I second that.
Oh, boy, I'm getting myself in trouble. We haven't even started yet.
Notes.
Yeah, you'll take notes. That's good. Well, I did want to share a few thoughts about the topic around freedom of expression, because it is a topic that is extraordinarily personal to me. And ensuring that we have freedom of expression, but more importantly, civil dialogue on our campuses. It is a concept that is deeply woven into the fabric of academia, and the universities of Wisconsin are no exception. As I mentioned earlier, one of the 4 pillars of our strategic plan is to champion the democratic principles of free expression, academic freedom, and civil discourse. Yet I think it's fair to say that we live in very challenging times. And as we have all witnessed, there are a lot of passionate opinions on all sides of so many contentious issues that are demanding to be heard. It is clear that freedom of expression can, in many circumstances, be messy, or even worse. Freedom of expression by necessity requires us to be exposed to speech with which we may disagree or even find reprehensible. The solution to that challenge is more speech, and not a reversion to limiting what is said and by whom. But that does not mean that freedom of expression is a free license to say whatever one wants without reaction or consequence. We are all accountable for what we write and what we say. Now, let me be very clear. There's no place on our campuses for bigotry, whether that is anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, or the like. As a society and as universities, we must condemn such speech in the same way that we condemn terrorism. We also need to take all reasonable steps to ensure that our students feel safe on our campuses. I continue to believe that universities can and must be marketplaces of ideas, where civil dialogue is encouraged and differing ideas can be exchanged and vigorously debated, so long as that occurs in a civil fashion. Certainly in my meetings with students over the past months for our It's Just Coffee get-togethers, I have been encouraged by what I see and what I hear in that regard. Similarly, I know our universities across the state are working hard to make sure that marketplace of ideas flourishes and to protect the practice of civil dialogue. But there is work to be done if we are to ensure that all viewpoints are heard in an environment in which speakers are not automatically labeled or tainted immediately based on what they may have said. It is time that we listen and not just react. It is time that we work to understand what it is like to walk in someone else's shoes so that we can understand their perspective. It is time that we exhibit humility based on the acceptance of the fact that none of us has a monopoly on the truth. And it is most certainly a time to exhibit tolerance. The universities of Wisconsin can help play a major role in finding and implementing solutions. And as you'll hear from our next presenters, I think we are making progress on a number of fronts, but we certainly have more work to do. So with that, and to kick things off, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to my colleague, Vice President Jeff Brandt. Jeff.
Thank you, President Rothman. Thank you, Regents, and obviously President Rothman for having us here today to discuss this important topic. The universities of Wisconsin have been consistently strengthening our commitment to free expression and academic freedom over the past several years, and that work has accelerated under President Rothman. So we are pleased to be here today to present publicly our efforts and our reports from our universities in their work of supporting and advancing free expression to the full Board of Regents. With me today, as they've introduced themselves already, are Eric Giordano from WIPS and Tim Scheel, our newly minted Director of Wicked. Tim will also continue to be part-time loan from the Stout campus, where he's going to continue to lead some of the efforts happening there that he's had such great success with through the years. Now, I'm going to first discuss the 2022-23 Annual Freedom of Expression and Academic Freedom Report that has been provided to you. Then Eric and Tim will discuss where we're headed with Wicked as we move into the next phase of that organization. And then our chancellors, Chancellor Wachter and Chancellor Mnuchin, will discuss some of the free expression events being held on their campuses. As President Rothman likes to say, if you want to know what we're doing, just take a look at our strategic plan. The plan, as Jay reminded us all, was passed by this board last December, calls on our universities to, quote, champion the democratic principles of free expression, academic freedom, and civil discourse. It directs us to do this in 4 ways. First, amplifying our efforts to be advocates of free expression, academic freedom, and civil discourse. Second, measuring student understanding of the First Amendment and civil discourse. Third, developing resources for our universities. And fourth, working with universities to strengthen policies. Let me take these one at a time. First, amplifying our efforts. Certainly, all of you here have heard of President Rothman's frequent and unrelenting championing of freedom of expression and academic freedom. Whether it's in testimony before the legislature, speaking to the media, convening discussions on our campuses, or meeting with students through his It's Just Coffee initiative, President Rothman is elevating the discussion of First Amendment at our universities and in our communities. We are championing that our public universities must be catalysts for debate and discussion. The president is leading these efforts. He is a strong ambassador for civil dialogue and is an active participant when he engages in small room with dozens of students, talking with them about the importance of respectful, honest debate and conversation. We've been seeking feedback from these students, and each of them we speak with expresses how helpful it was to be able to sit across the room from someone with a different belief system and share opinions honestly and without judgment. It's our hope that these conversations will have a ripple effect among our students. If you're not aware, these conversations were sparked by a similar project started here at UW-Madison by a student who described it to President Rothman in the summer of 2022. Like any good idea, we decided to use it for ourselves, with the students' permission, of course. And I mention this because it shows the students out there are hungry for this kind of dialogue too. There is a real appetite to be engaged in these conversations. And I think they are far more open to exposing themselves to a range of thought and ideas many older adults don't give them credit for. Next up, measuring student understanding of the First Amendment and civil discourse. As you all know, we conducted a survey of students about their attitudes towards the First Amendment. Tim and Eric led the researchers conducting the survey. We know that the survey was controversial. We know that very well. But as President Rothman said at the time, we should not be afraid of the results. And in fact, the survey showed us many things that were really good to confirm. Namely, that students say our faculty have an appreciation for multiple viewpoints and encourage robust discussion in the classroom. We also have been candid and transparent about where we need to improve as well. Which leads us into the next phase, developing resources for our universities and strengthening policies. We believe freedom of expression and promoting more civil dialogue on our campuses are critical to our success as universities and as a state. That's why we decided to make these themes prominent in the strategic plan and why we are committing resources to create the Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue. WICID will work really closely with WIPS to help develop and identify resources for and with the universities. It will be a hub of information to support as universities review policies and procedures that would help them better promote civil dialogue. Eric and Tim will speak to this topic further in their presentation. In addition to the work we've been doing that is spelled out in our strategic plan, over the last several years, we have been producing an annual report describing our activities and the events our universities are hosting that support academic freedom and promote the freedom of expression. The report we present to you today covers the year starting July 1st, 2022 to ending June 30th, 2023. I want to thank the UW's Administration Office of Compliance for helping assemble this report. It's always a big lift and we always appreciate their help. For the report, we ask our universities to describe activities that affirmed a commitment to and support of academic freedom and freedom of expression. The university is engaged in a wide variety of activities consistent with Regent Policy Document 421. The commitment to academic freedom and freedom of expression policy. Chancellors Wachter and Mnookin will share some examples from their universities during their presentation. RPD 421 also requires our universities to provide specific notice to students and employees about their free speech rights, protections, and responsibilities. They do this in a number of ways during fall orientation, during convocation, through videos, handouts, emails, online courses, and public presentations. They know that there is no single great way to communicate with students. They try to deliver that information in a number of different ways. The report makes clear, and you'll hear more today, that we offer a robust and ongoing commitment to and support of free expression on our campuses. We are very proud of the work being done in this space. We are proud to report it out, and we look forward to enhancing it as we move forward. Please note that in addition to all the members of the board, we do provide this report to legislative leaders and key committee leaders, and it has been available to the media and general public since Monday when the board materials were posted online. I have personally discussed this report in Chairman Murphy's committee a number of times, and I think there's real interest in seeing where we're doing it well and where we can do it better. So with that, I want to turn it over to our friends at Eric and Tim to talk about the next steps for Wicked.
Well, since we already introduced ourselves, just as a reminder, the reason why I'm here is my organization that serves underneath Jeff's office, known as WIPS, is also overseeing this new institute called Wicked. And so for branding purposes, we are being known as Wicked WIPS.
Goodness.
We want to start off with the vision of this new institute. It's pretty robust and bold. The universities of Wisconsin are national leaders in producing and disseminating knowledge and enhancing democracy through civil dialogue in a robust marketplace of ideas. The mission of Wicked is to provide resources, opportunities, and support for teaching, learning, and practicing viewpoint diversity, freedom of expression, academic freedom, civil dialogue, and civic participation within our universities and communities. Tim?
For me, one of the guiding lights of Wicked will be a plaque that is on this very campus, and I will quick read it. Whatever may be the limitations which trammel inquiry elsewhere, we believe the great state of Wisconsin should ever encourage that continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth can be found. That goes back a long time, Regents. I'm sure you all know that. I think it's good to have a reminder and keep that in the forefront as we think about Wicked's mission. So RPD 421, of course, affirms that basic idea and provides some additional detail and some reporting requirements and so on. And going forward, Wicked will support the Chancellor's annual report required by that policy.
Okay, thanks, Tim. We'd now like to talk about some of the core activities that Wicked will undertake. First of all, we will be doing measurement and assessment. Wicked will undertake robust activities related to measuring, researching, assessing, and evaluating freedom of speech and academic freedom in compliance with RPD 421. We'll also intend to examine and assess other types of outcomes in these areas, working in partnership with campuses, for example, around curriculum. And this plugs into a national movement that is really examining courses throughout colleges and universities across America in civic learning and democratic engagement. Second, we envision Wicked as an information and resource hub related to national trends, to create tools and to identify best practices, which we will share with our universities. We also see Wicked as a conduit for a two-way communication with our universities so that we will be deliberately seeking out the best that is happening not only nationally, but also within our universities and sharing that information as well. This leads into the third core activity, which is reporting and dissemination. Although Jeff mentioned, we believe there's room for improvement in some areas on our campuses related to freedom of speech and viewpoint diversity, as well as civil dialogue. We also know that our universities are already deeply committed to and engaged in freedom of expression, academic freedom, and civil dialogue. So one of our main activities will be to promote and amplify the innovative practices and programs that are currently in existence and those that will emerge. Fourth, resources, support, and training. Wicked will actively facilitate workshops and training, particularly related to freedom of expression as well as civil dialogue. To this end, we'll be actively seeking grants in order to help create training events, workshops, research, and assessment. Much of these resources will be turned back to the universities in the form of research grants and innovation grants. These are critical if we desire to incentivize innovative research and practice by our faculty and students. Fifth, programming. We'll collaborate with campuses to support their goals of bringing in speakers and experts with diverse points of view on timely topics and modeling civil discourse in the process. We also envision an annual signature event, most likely a convening of faculty, students, and administrators around key issues related to freedom of expression and civil dialogue.
So as the interim director, my job is really to do the groundwork, lay the foundation for a full-time director to step in at some point in hopefully the not too distant future. So we have some priorities for this year. This isn't a complete list. This is some highlights, I guess we might call it. Our work will overlap significantly with a number of other departments or units within the Universities of Wisconsin System Administration. So we'll be establishing a committee. A group of folks have been talking about that over the summer and into the fall, and we'll be extending that conversation as we move forward so we can determine what best ways our work overlaps, how we can collaborate, not step on each other's toes, all of that good stuff. We'll be looking to establish a board of advisors. We would like folks from the state, nationally prominent organizations. We want the kind of people who are dedicated to WICKED's mission. We're going to need to do a lot of work with the campuses. And so we'll be looking to appoint an individual on each campus who can serve as a liaison or coordinator. There'll be sort of a primary channel of communication and work between WICKED and each of the 13 campuses. Well, obviously we need to get a website going, get our communication system and processes figured out so that when a person steps in next fall, maybe, they'll have everything ready to go. We're working on an initial grant cycle to be offered this spring so that universities can get some proposals this spring to begin some of their innovative practices next fall. Again, to reiterate, those grants would be open to research projects by faculty or students or others on campus. They'll be open to assessment projects. Right now, RPD 421 does a nice job in telling us, I think, what's at the surface of what campuses are doing. I believe campuses are doing far more than what we see on RPD 421. And so part of what we're doing is trying to figure out what is this extra work that they're doing that isn't necessarily showing up in that report. So I'll oversee a distribution process of these grants. We'll be working on developing relationships or continuing relationships with both university and non-university partners. We want to do some programming in the spring, so we're having discussions about what workshops, what events, what panels will be of interest to the campuses and across the system. And we'll need to start the process of hiring that full-time director.
I think we're ready for Chancellors Wachter and Mnuchin to come forward and give us a snapshot of what's going on their campuses. At a microphone there, or you can do the podium if you'd like, Chancellor Wachter. Okay. We're fine. Sorry.
Are there slides? Fantastic. Thank you so much for allowing us to talk about the work that's on our campuses. You could advance to the next slide. Does that cartoon make you a little uncomfortable? Maybe an example of the cancel culture we seem to be in the midst of. You know, shutting people down is easy. Fighting is easy. Getting into an actual argument, that takes work. And yet learning how to disagree is essential for durable accord. The freedom to express one's thoughts and ideas, Regent Policy 421, outlines our duty as campuses to promote and protect those freedoms when others attempt to restrict them. Certainly, meeting the technical requirements of freedom of expression and academic freedom is critical. and I'll address what we do in this regard. Yet it's only one step, because we must recognize that people come to the table of policies with a bundle of values, experiences, identities, and then these identities manifest on how they view, process, and interact with these principles. Creating an environment where we can move simply beyond expression calls for the creation of an environment where the dialogue, where the argument can occur, and at the same time be an environment where respect and inclusion can exist in the midst of this diversity. It's what happens in the gray intersection of these three: free speech, academic freedom, and inclusion and belonging that matters most. So I'll do three things: articulate who we are as a campus in regard to Regent policy, what we do to comply with the free speech policy, and then talk about that intersection, how civil discourse to provide a bridge, and what we're doing about it. So, all right, how do I use this? Do I use this? It's best to talk about the mission statement of the university, because the mission provides the foundation for our demonstrated commitment to these issues. This mission is actually realized through the university learning goals, which are measured and evaluated. 3 directly talk about taking other people's perspectives into account and are embedded within the university studies program. We have one on communication, which talks about civilly engaging in an exchange of ideas and integrating diverse perspectives. We have a learning goal around individual and social responsibility, practicing healthy interdependence and mutual respect. And 2 specifically devoted to critical and creative thinking, which has us evaluating assumptions and biases associated with projects, practices, or processes, and considering multiple and diverse and global perspectives. You're also aware that second to Madison, the campus hosts one of the most diverse student bodies, with students represented from over 45 different countries, including our own. And it is complicated. Next slide, please. We must recognize that disputes of any kind, political ones, intellectual ones, often have their roots in much deeper disagreements about the nature of morality, about knowledge, about what it means to be human, how we determine reality, and so forth. And that's shaped by our experiences, cultures, and identities. And that map looks something like this. You can see how complicated it is. Even when we talk about free speech, we're operating in the applied morality part of the circle. So what do we do to make sure that people understand the free speech policy and responsibilities? Next slide, please. We have a whole set of communications that goes out and toolkits that people have access to, including messages, repositories where they can find documents, orientations when they come to our campuses and at the beginning of every semester. But I think it's what we're doing in the gray intersection in which civil dialogue lives that's more interesting and more important. Next slide, please. Because rules don't show people how to engage. They don't lead to more conversation or promote understanding, nor do they address the growing divide or make people feel like they belong to something larger in spite of differences. Rules are not the bridge or the way out of the cancel culture. Civil dialogue is the bridge. We've been much more intentional about equipping and encouraging faculty, staff, and community to have those conversations through modeling, through providing opportunities, to challenging when there is pushback, when diverse opinions are being presented. And it means people have to learn in that very uncomfortable space that occurs in which ideas are being raised that run deeply counter to your personal beliefs and stances. Let's face it, it's hard. In order to be able to think, you need to risk being offensive or offended, not to deliberately seek to be offensive or immediately offended. But there is a mutually dependent relationship between speaking and thinking, whose integrity supersedes the moral obligation not to offend or jump to offense. We do not merely speak because we know what we know to be true. We speak so that we can figure out what is true. How we deal with this tension on our campuses is vitally important. Next slide, please. And I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. I call the first one the Matt Walsh visit. Every campus has a different personality. Our UW Superior has been a somewhat quiet campus, particularly with regard to a history of controversial speakers. The visit by Matt Walsh changed all of that and openly challenged some on campus on their ideas of free speech and diversity. Matt Walsh is a conservative political commenter and activist. He's the host of the Matt Walsh podcast and is a columnist for the American conservative website, The Daily Wire. Walsh is not in support of the LGBT rights movement, in particular the transgender rights movement and the idea of being transgender in general, and has what many would call a controversial style. A student organization brought the speaker to campus. Our student activities director assisted with arranging the security that he required and worked with the group to have the events advertised to the community and to the campus. Our students supportive of the LGBTQ transgender rights were highly upset that the university would bring someone who clearly espouses, in their view, overt antagonism toward them in these issues to campus. How could we do this, they said, if we valued diversity? They did not consider this free speech, and clearly at the moment, they did not see diversity as diversity of opinion. This was the teachable moment. Our student affairs staff took a great deal of time to have a conversation with students on both sides about diversity of opinion, free speech, what their rights were, what Matt Walsh's rights were. The result, was it tense? Oh, you bet it was. There was a peaceful protest, but the event went off without incident. And maybe the most important takeaway was that students on both sides felt supported. These are enormously hard moments when one's personal identity is being challenged. And I think for some, there was fear on both sides about being harassed as a result of the presentation. The speaker also resulted in the realization by some students that other students were not openly supportive of that aspect of theirs or their friends' fundamental identities, and it was challenging. Students on both sides lost friends over the incident because of beliefs. On the upside, I can say there were many more conversations as a result, and as difficult as an experience as it was, it helped to illustrate for all what free speech and civil dialogue in action really means beyond the classroom. It demonstrates how hard the work is. It's also an example of how inclusiveness and free speech interact and why civil discourse is the only way forward. Another example, I call it the drag show petition. We had a conservative student organization that was against a drag show that was being held by another student group on campus. The student organization received support from student involvement, again, about how to post the petition and how to gather signatures. This was another classroom teaching moment, and it happened in a communication class. He took the class, put them into random groups, and had each group research the topic and present for a classroom dialogue. Did all the students walk out with a common stance and support for drag shows? No, absolutely not. Did they come to an understanding that there's a long history behind drag, that there was a grounded argument against, and that the topic was far more complex? The answer is yes. And that's what we want. Not what to think, but how to think, to understand the complexity of the world around them and how to communicate those thoughts and respectfully engage over differences. In the classroom, students don't write papers or do presentations simply to express what they believe about a topic. They write papers and do presentations to figure out what they believe about a topic. And then it's how we foster having the conversation in a manner that lets both sides feel heard and respected. Next slide, please. And to my friends on both sides of the aisle, we have always used the political season as a natural place to encourage development and diversity of thought in a nonpartisan way. In particular, I'd like to highlight Jacket Votes. It's comprised of a variety of nonpartisan student and community-focused events, programs, and presentations as part of our civic action plan. UW Superior won all-in honors for student turnout in the 2018 midterm elections, the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, as well as earned voter-friendly status in 21-22 by the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project, NASPA. and All In's Most Engaged Campus Award in 2022. We really don't care about the party that they vote for, but we do care that they are engaged. These efforts originally came about from a 2019 Menard Center grant. And I think of note are the conversations that happened during the elections, not focused on the particular politics, but on how to have difficult conversations. This fall, UW system held the Wisconsin Dialogues that provided best practices on handling difficult dialogues and creating inclusive classroom environments. UW Superior had the single largest contingent in attendance. And we recognize that this is a continual effort, that you just don't stop. So we have our own version called Superior Dialogues, where we have a series of workshops to promote and teach concepts related to civil dialogue. Each session has an expert on various aspects of citizenship, civil rights, free speech, communication, empathy, perspective taking, respect, and using your voice. All sessions are open to the UW Superior students, faculty, and staff. Our first session this fall alone, called Civil Dialogue Rights and Responsibilities, had 75 in attendance, talking about the legal aspects of free speech rights. And this year, to double check our efforts, we're developing a map of all efforts related to civil dialogue and discourse that a student experiences and how they experience this topic during their time. And this is what we know. It starts with the weekend of welcome when they first arrive on campus and in our Global Buds program that pairs an international student with a domestic student. It continues in our first year experience course with a module. And then it's in selected university studies courses with different assignments related to building civil discourse and dialogue knowledge and skills. We know that we have an equal number of courses that are framed liberal or conservative, and the word perspective appears 75 times. We have ongoing program with civil dialogue skills in the extracurricular space as well, in our library, in our Link Center, in student employment training, and in our EBDI programming on having difficult conversations. And this will also be in the Jacket Fest Canvas module that's available to all students. In addition, we have a range of organizations that support students, over 45, where they can get together, have social time to learn, as well as provide access for others to learn. And there's far more. We know that students bring a complex multitude of identities and experiences, and that they need repeated opportunities to witness models as well as practice civil dialogue skills in order to engage thoughtfully with ideas and with their colleagues, as well as to facilitate their own self-discovery. They need to feel like they can engage and belong, even though they have differences. The cancel culture that we have today makes it challenging. But while we have our students, it is our mission that we embrace to have them understand the complexity of the world that they live in, how they can more productively engage with it and with each other, and in turn serve as role models for their good, for the good of the state and the nation.
Thank you, Chancellor Wachter. Chancellor Mnookin.
Those remarks were terrific. And a lot of what I could say really is, you know, to second what Chancellor Wachter said, because I think she did a terrific job of describing the whole. But I really appreciate this invitation to say a few words about this topic, which I care about a great deal as a university leader, as a lawyer, and as a citizen. I'm also well aware that we have a distinguished panel of legislators here, and I'm very eager to hear from them. So I'm going to keep my remarks, and Jeff Barant suggested that this was a reasonable way to go. I'm going to keep my remarks quite brief. And of course, I'm happy to expand further on anything going on at my university. But I do want to be clear at the outset. The University of Wisconsin-Madison is absolutely committed to protecting freedom of expression. Doing so is, of course, a legal obligation for us as a public institution, where the First Amendment applies to us directly. It's also vital for our mission as an institution of higher education, and it's core to that fearless sifting and winnowing, the quote that we also heard earlier, that fearless sifting and winnowing in search of the truth, to which we have long been dedicated. But protecting free speech and free expression is also a moral imperative. Both human freedom and our constitutional democracy depend upon the free and open exchange of ideas. Full stop. That is right and true and clear. But it's also true that living out our commitment to freedom of speech is sometimes hard. The fact is, freedom of speech is relatively easy when we agree with each other. It's easy to defend the freedom of speech of somebody who you think is getting it right. It's much more difficult when we don't agree, although that's precisely when it's most important. On top of that, we live in times of deep disagreement and division and polarization. These are undeniable aspects of our common life, which can make it exceedingly difficult to hold on to our values, particularly in the face of both global and local events that can further polarize and divide. And so recognizing this dynamic, something that I've sometimes talked about it this way, and it didn't originate with me, but people who, they believe in free speech for me, but not for thee, right? When there's real parallels, structural parallels, they don't see them. And they don't recognize that the very value that they're holding on in one setting is not something that they're aware of or adhering to in the other. And we see lots of examples of this across the political spectrum. And so one thing we're doing at UW-Madison is talking about that, naming that dynamic, that if we believe in free speech, as we do and as we must, we have to also think about it in an even-handed way. It also does mean, in my view, we can't talk seriously about free speech in a campus community without also talking about belonging. We aspire to be a campus where all students feel fully included and have a sense that the campus is theirs. We know we have further work to do in this respect. And part of the challenge is that free speech and belonging are at times in genuine tension, and it would be a mistake to pretend otherwise. Now, to be sure, these values are not always or necessarily in tension. In fact, in a deep way, they can also be mutually reinforcing. Our highest ideals on our campus envision a campus community in which the free exchange of ideas coexists with mutual care, respect, and acceptance that are at the core of belonging. In a very real sense, the exercise of free speech and the enjoyment of a sense of belonging may even require one another. Absent a sense that I am respected and included, will I truly feel free to speak my mind? What better evidence that I belong than having those around me attend and be interested in my point of view? So sometimes these values are mutually reinforcing, but they are sometimes truly in tension. If you say something that I find wildly offensive or that fails to recognize my values or my core personhood, I can risk feeling like this is a place that this is not a place that I belong. And Chancellor Wachter gave some good examples of that, which which we have on our campus as well. And so there's no question that broad free speech rights can hurt people's sense of inclusion. We can't ignore that reality. And so I really want to make two very simple points here about how we think about this issue on my campus. One, as I've already said, we have to embrace free speech and belonging as core values. One cannot be sacrificed to the other. They both have to guide us. And when they're in tension, we have to name that, but we can't completely ignore the one because of the other. The second, and this is important, especially in our polarized times, is that it's the most extreme examples of speech that get so much attention and airspace and sometimes frame the dialogue. We have worked on our campus to create a new FAQ around free speech to help educate our students. We are talking about free speech as early as orientation. And it's true that the First Amendment is often extremely speech protective. It doesn't protect all speech. If someone makes a clear and direct threat of violence, there's no protection. If speech turns into severe and pervasive harassment, that's not protected either. But there's a myth, including on our campus and much, much more widely, that hate speech is by definition not free speech. And like it or not, many hateful things are still in fact protected by our Constitution. But I think that when we focus on the most extreme examples both in society and on our campuses. We risk missing the forest for the trees. What's enormously important for us as a university is actually not primarily those moments when the very most provocative and challenging voices come to campus. Although, to be clear, it is our constitutional responsibility when speakers are invited through our regular processes to engage with those in a content-neutral way and to protect their ability to share their message. And we have, and we will. I want there to be no doubt about that. But what's actually, I think, more important to our students' learning and their growth is to create a regular practice and regular teaching and engaging about how to engage across difference, to promote and teach and learn about civil discourse, not at these outer edges, but in much more routine and regular ways. To teach our students that they have much to learn from engaging across difference in a civil and constructive way, and that doing so will make them stronger and more careful thinkers. And they will learn that they can often learn as much from those with whom they disagree as with those whose views they share. I also want to reiterate something that Chancellor Wachter said, which is that learning to engage across difference and to engage in civil dialogue is a skill. It is not something that you simply have or don't have, or even believe in or don't believe in. And so part of what we've been talking about a lot at Madison is what are the things that we can do to help grow that skill in the classroom, but also outside of it. And so from this perspective, I'm going to take my last couple of minutes to share a new program this year that I'm very excited about, which is our deliberation dinners. This draws on the experience and success of our discussion project, which is a project of our ed school that works to help instructors lead stronger in-class conversations, not only about difficult subjects, though partly, also in classes like chemistry. How do you create a strong discussion section? The Dean of the School of Education, Diana Hess, and her team have helped to create this, they've spearheaded this new program, which brings together ideologically diverse groups of 10 students who have raised their hand to sign up. And we had a lot of interest in this among our students. And they're signing up for 7 deliberation dinners with the same group of 10 students. And they were selected specifically for political and ideological diversity as one of the primary shapings of these groups. These groups gather, yes, for dinner. And by the way, there's research that people develop these skills better when they can do so over a meal or in ways that humanize each other to one another. And they work with a faculty facilitator, the same one each time, who has been trained, who leads each group through a focused deliberation on an important topic on which people have varied points of view. The group started with a perhaps less controversial topic, like AI on campus, right? Difference of opinion, but doesn't necessarily set off like political warning bells. But they're moving into more challenging territory, from how we think about tax policy. Should there be a flat tax? To abortion policy. The team is also doing a thorough evaluation and assessment to see whether this structured, focused, repeated deliberation activity works to build skills and civil discourse. And so I'm really excited about this as something that we can potentially scale up if it works. We are a research university, so we're not going to assume it works. We're going to try to study and test that. But if so, we can scale up both for us and share with the wider world. This is just one example of what we're doing on our campus, but it's an example of trying to be research-based, engaged across, and building something that will teach students skills and develop a practice of engaging across in a way that we hope they can then take to their peers who maybe didn't participate in this project. Part of what we need to do is seed these skills, both as practices that students can engage in and where they can be beginning to improve, to further strengthening our culture, even for those who may not have participated in this specific activity. So my basic view is in the face of challenging times, We can't back away from. In fact, we have to really redouble our efforts to promote free speech and belonging and civil discourse. I'm happy to share more about the deliberation dinners or about a set of other initiatives we have on campus, but this one is one of the ones that is brand new this year and off to a really strong start. And so I thought it made for a good focus. For me, there are challenges in this space. I'm not going to deny that or shy away from that. But I think that when we can turn those challenges into opportunities for real learning and for creating a culture of strong, shared discourse across difference, it creates a picture that is full of promise and hope for our campus, for our democracy, and even for our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Mnuchin. I wonder now if we could turn to some of our legislative colleagues who've come down here to see us. We'd like to hear your point of view on these issues that we tackle together.
Well, I guess I'll hop in. I'd like to thank President Rothman for inviting us here today. Ever since President Rothman has taken over his position, he's been someone that I've been able to reach out to and talk to. And I really feel strongly that he believes very strongly and very personally in trying to make sure that free speech and civil dialogue on campus is something that we can count on going forward. So thank you so much for that. I also would like to say that over the last couple of years, I've gotten to know Eric and gotten to know Tim Scheel, and I'm pretty sure probably Tim and I don't always agree politically. Maybe rarely do we rarely agree politically. But when it comes to this topic, when it comes to the topic of free speech, I know that he's somebody that I can count on. I know that he's somebody that feels very passionately about protecting free speech, about taking the dialogue on our campuses to a better level. Sifting and winnowing. I have a very good friend who is a former regent. You probably all know him, Tim Higgins. Tim has sifting and winnowing on his license plate. And you'll have to imagine for yourself how he got that on there. But when I think about sifting and winnowing, it is the essence of a higher liberal education. And our ability to foster that is extremely important. And there are some things that are working against us in this particular area. In a liberal education, we sift and winnow to find truth. And there are certain truths that we can all agree on. Not a lot of them, but there are some. But today, there are postmodern single theorists that don't believe in any of these truths. And it causes us not to have any kind of level of where to start our dialogue. And I think that's a problem. I was happy to hear Chancellor Wachter talked about having Matt Walsh on campus and how that went. I think about recently on the campus here, we had Ben Shapiro, and I look at how that went in comparison to 5 years ago. I don't know exactly when it was, but it was roughly 5 years ago. And very disruptive situation, and there are problems there. in this, I went to the Ben Shapiro event on campus. I thought that Chancellor Mnuchin should be proud of the way that that was handled, the way that it was expressed to the crowd, we're going to have civil dialogue. And there were protesters outside, but the event was able to go on the way that I would like to see it go on. And that's something that's very important. I always tell the story about many years ago, back in the 1980s. I was in my 20s at the time, but Lawrence University invited Angela Davis to come and speak on campus. My dad had an absolute fit. And I have to say, I am strongly anti-communist. And Angela Davis was an avowed communist, but I told my dad at that time, I had the instincts towards free speech even back then to say, yeah, I don't like her either, but stopping her from speaking is not the way to handle this. Letting people speak, having the sunlight shine on it, and letting people know what's happening and where they're at is really the best way for these situations to be handled. If there's one thing I've had some disappointments during this process. As Professor Shield and his team were trying to put on the survey, our interim chancellor at Whitewater resigned. That was very disappointing to me, very disappointing. The idea that one of our chancellors would say, oh, I am so much against getting the viewpoint of the students, and I want to stop this so much that I'm willing to resign over that. That, again, very disappointing. And at the end of the day, if there's one thing that I would love to be able to achieve on our campuses, and that is to teach our students not to be offended. How do we show them that not to take every remark that's made right to heart? To be a little tougher sometimes and be able to take some of the criticisms and be able to deal with it. So I've talked plenty long enough, but I really do enjoy being here. Thank you so much. And President Rothman, I really look forward to working with you more in supporting Wicked. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. Representative Whitkey, would you have a comment or two for us?
How long do I have?
Well, I'll let you know depending on what you say. I'm just kidding.
No, that in the interest of free speech.
Still free speech, right?
That was a good one.
You need to bring it pretty close to you. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Geez, maybe I can get this one. Does that work?
Yeah.
Is it-
sure.
okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I should be used to this. Okay, so I guess as I sit and listen to this, and then I probably have a little bit different background than most because I relate more with President Rothman because he and I come out of private industry, and I think we've talked about some things that we've encountered and are familiar with. So I kind of look at this a little bit differently. And that is, I took a look at the survey that was done and some of the background information. I looked at the report that was compiled. And I'm sure many of you that are regents that are at the executive level, when you get a 45, 50-page report, you kind of skim through and kind of look, wish there was an executive summary, but I realize this is government academia and it's a little different. So I looked for some things, in the surveys and so on. And I looked more across all campuses rather than possibly specific issues at a certain campus or not, even though I do pay attention to one more than others probably. But like what, I'll give you an example. So I looked at across all campuses, and in one hand, the majority of the students don't want us to limit anything that could be considered harmful for, with any kind of speech order. They don't want us to limit it. But if I go to the next question, those that responded to the survey say, but on the other hand, I would like administrators to kind of be the guide or to do that. And I look for certain trends that way. When I took a look at the report I have now, I guess I'll challenge everybody in this room that my expectation is that guarding freedom of speech is kind of like, isn't that just like one of the things you do, like making sure there are books and professors and things in the normal course of business. I think that should just be just if we let it get away from us and we've got to talk about how we've really got to make efforts to protect it. I'm kind of disappointed as to where society's been, and I'd be a little bit more vocal to that. I believe there should be zero tolerance, no matter what you have on campus, who the speaker is, what the group is. There should be zero tolerance for any kind of disruption. Okay. So one of the things that I'm extremely concerned about is I think that we should be raising the bar, and that relies on all the people that we have over here that we've entrusted to each one of the 13 campuses, plus the flagship that we have here. And that is that leadership comes from the top. Okay. So as I take a look at the report that was done, I'm very grateful that I can look and see that UW Eau Claire has made a tremendous amount of efforts to bring different pieces onto campus at a regular basis. But I also look at some other things. So I was extremely grateful that when I look at UW Milwaukee as an example, when they did something, they did it to 100% of employees. Private sector, I'm used to, I've got to take each year I have to sign off on our employee handbook. I've got to sign off on now we've gotten into a much larger training every year that I have to sign off on that has to do with data security and so on. And these are just expectations of it sets my expectations as to how I'm supposed to perform. So I look at things that we should be doing on campus, like student orientation. Back decades ago, when I was at the university, if you were in the dorm or whatever, the expectations of your behavior were set by the resident assistant right away from the start. I mean, and then I look at what follows after that. So I think we should be setting a bar higher. Innovation is the bedrock of what we have in our nation. And I'm concerned that because that we are making everything about a political difference and polarizing it and relying more on news that has to come from social media, from other aspects that are formulating people's opinion, that we are going to get to a point where we're just, our students are going to be moving farther away, and we're not going to be able to express the ideas in the classroom on our campus that really will generate new innovation that we sorely need with all kinds of different industries. And I could pull probably a lot of our regents that would probably shake their heads and say, we need workers, we need innovative workers, we need to start meeting the challenges of things going 10 years forward, not now. And so whatever we have to do to promote that, I'm all for it. One last thing I noticed, and I looked at some of the other campus things that are going on, and I'm glad to see that we're making a thing, but to me, it's just a fundamental thing that I should see no matter what. But I did notice one thing, and I'll make comment on one other thing, and that is I noticed someone invited, let's say, I saw there was, I think it was here at the university. It said that there was some kind of discussion that was with some university staff, professors, students, and one senator. Okay, so I'm going to just make the suggestion that if you're going to have events on campus and you really want to start having some kind of discussions, I think you should be inviting, like in our case, people on both sides. I did that earlier here with a panel at the UW. I was here with Senator Royce and a number of others. We don't necessarily get into fights. I think it's good for people to see that we can actually sit in the same room, talk about things that have differences of opinions. And I think that's what our students need to learn. And so however we have to do that, I'm all for it. I wish I could legislate it, not necessarily possible. But that's where I come from. To me, this is all minimum expectation. But can't we raise the bar of what we expect on our campuses? If you love Wisconsin as much as I do, you will want to have this to be the model for the rest of the world to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the spirit of jumping across the aisle, I'm going to turn to Representative Emerson.
Thank you, President Walsh. And so I'm just going to start out with, I agree with a lot of what Bob and Dave have said. And, I always hesitate with any kind of poll or survey when one person cherry picks a question or not. And I think even looking at it as a timestamp, we need to look at it over time. And I know I've talked to some of the team about, well, what was this question like? And how did we ask this? And I think, the more we do this, the better we're going to get at it. Certain questions like, do you speak up in class with an opinion different than others? Well, in that, we also didn't say how many people ever speak up in class, because there's a certain percentage who are never going to speak up in class. And so, there's things like that. I could pick out probably 10 different cherry-picked questions to make certain points. But one of the things that I think we need to do at our higher education systems is get beyond where we're looking at training workers and we're training thinkers. How do we train how people look at problems? And personally, I went to school as a biotechnology major. I don't use that at all in my day-to-day life anymore. However, I use a lot of the lessons that I learned in a history class or on campus. When I went to UW River Falls, it was during the first Gulf War. And there was a pretty big controversy on campus because one professor, I think it was a political science class, held up a paper flag and said, "Tell me why I shouldn't burn this." Nobody, but granted, we are currently at war at the time. First war that we'd had since Vietnam. Not a single person in that class, and I wasn't in that class, not a single person in that class said anything. And so, of course, the paper flag was burned. I mean, it was like an index card. And of course, the news media blew up about it. That was one of the best lessons for our entire campus is, can you articulate your thoughts? I think if one person would have said, because my dad served in the Army and he still has problems from it, I don't think he would have burned the flag. But when an entire class sat silent, then this happened. And there was a lot of protests. We had media from all over the place. And this is back in the days when media came and it was the big trucks with the big dishes. And, on the little campus, it really made a difference. The lesson I learned from that is if you've got thoughts, speak up. I think our campuses need to really work on it. And some campuses are doing a phenomenal job. And I'm looking across at Chancellor Jim right now. Of course, I'm going to plug UW Eau Claire, but thank you. We've had some great presentations there where we've had people with opposing views come and do a panel discussion. And I think in our society today, we don't model, none of us, good behavior on how to have a discussion. And it's not about having one person come or the other person come. For me, and unfortunately, I had to be in Madison, so I missed that conversation. But, having this entire room full of people see how two very passionate people could discuss a topic on opposing views and stand up and shake hands afterwards. And I think that that's something that all of us need to be doing a little bit better. Certainly those of us in the legislature. Bob's right. When we're having one person come, we should have another person from the opposite political persuasion come. But I'm also going to challenge all of us to make sure that we're doing that as we're going into an election season. The last two election seasons, I haven't had a debate with my opponent, whoever that opponent is, because they refuse to show up. And so all of us being incumbents, we need to encourage other people to come to those debates so that our communities as a whole start to learn about topics and about options. And then, you know, one of the things that came up in the survey is about harm. And I think those were some of the trickier questions, because like Bob said, in one place, it seemed like the answer was one thing and you turn the page and it's a different thing. Well, what's not defined in there is what is harm. Is that a word that you don't like? Or, you know, is it somebody using incorrect pronouns for somebody? It's harmful. It's heartbreaking when that happens. You know, it's more harmful when somebody physically beats somebody, but words do matter too. Or is it harmful to display a burning cross? You know, when we're looking at a student body that most of them were born after 9/11, do all of them understand the background of what a burning cross is? And is that a teachable moment for our institutions to say, well, this happened, and usually when after that happened, somebody was kidnapped and killed and lynched. And so that is, maybe nobody is getting lynched then, but for people, that means that this could be happening. And so that is a very harmful thing for some people. And I also think we need to have a little bit of grace for these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. That some of them are being, a lot of them, most of them are being exposed to ideas that they've never heard of before, different people that they've never heard of before, maybe different religions that they've never been exposed to. And it can be an uncomfortable time, but being uncomfortable isn't a bad thing. If you're always comfortable, you're never learning anything. And so how do we balance that uncomfortableness and harm factor without really going off the deep end, and modeling that behavior? I'll probably have other things that I came up with, but those are some of the things that I can think of off the top of my head, with the exception that I just want to congratulate both of the chancellors that spoke today about the programs that they're doing on campus. And I know that this is an example of what is happening across our state. So not to I don't want to say that the chancellors who didn't speak aren't doing good work too, because I know you all are, but those things don't happen in a vacuum. Having those programs takes energy, it takes time, it takes willing staff, and it takes money. And that's where we have fallen down on the job as the legislature, by not adequately funding our higher education systems so that you can have some wiggle room in your budget to do a discussion over dinner. You know, when some of our institutions are operating at, you know, budget deficits, how do you find the money to make sure that we can have a conversation over a meal? But that is where the real learning experiences happen. And so I want to congratulate you all for doing the work that you do. I think it's vitally important. And I think those lessons will carry on throughout years for the students. So thank you.
Thank you. Skipping back over, Representative Nedwesky.
I'm going to yield to Senator Larson first.
Okay, you may.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the regents who are here and spending your day in service to our state. And thank you to the chancellors. I know that there's a lot happening on campus, spending the day, and everyone else who decided to spend the most beautiful December day here inside of UW Madison. I'm pleased to be here. As not just as a legislator, but also a card-carrying member of the ACLU, I very strongly believe in free speech. But I think it's important to look at what the survey actually said that was done back in February. But the first thing that it said, if you look at it, it said that a lot of students didn't have a full understanding of what their First Amendment rights actually were. And I think that's worth pausing on for a second to think about what we should be doing in response to that as legislators, as people in the higher education community, to make sure that that's addressed. The second thing that it kind of noted was that there's a lot of misinformation and deciphering of what is true. So there's an abundance of wrong information, misinformation, and how to decipher that and what we should be doing on that. But I think the third and actually the largest thing that the survey said to me was not in what the survey asked or what the survey respondents put, but the number of respondents that we got, which is less than 11,000. And so in terms of campuses, that's 1/5 of the size of just the campus we're on here. So most students got the survey, looked at it and said, this is not a priority for me. I have other things that I'm focused on. And I think that's that are more concerning. And so what we should do is go directly to those students, something that I try and do regularly. I wish I could do more. And one student that sat down with, and I asked her what her concerns were. And the big one is that, and I asked specifically about free speech because I knew that we'd be talking about this. By the way, I lost count of the number of panels I've been on and the number of panels that they've had and the number of speeches that have been given and ink that's been spilled in regard to the stifling of free speech. But that's for another time. The big thing that she talked about is that people self-censoring is not censorship. It's just decency. The other thing she said is professors are doing their best to create an environment of diverse opinions and bringing people out. And a lot of times when people say you're censoring me, it's usually hate speech that people are saying. People comparing abortion to the Holocaust, people harassing queer students, or somebody writing "say no to LGBT" on a bulletin board before the class began. Students are willing to have conversations, but it seems they're not willing to accept the consequences of some of those more egregious forms of speech. Free speech does not mean free of consequences. And so I do think that unfortunately this is part of some of the larger, it's a distraction from some of the larger problems that are on campus. So I asked the student, and this was not just one, but she rang true. There was a number of students that we talked to. That there's other larger problems that should be addressed on campus, and these are you're not going to be strange to you, but mental health was the first one. Affordability of college, whether they're going to have a job at the end of all of the studies and all of the time they've put in, whether they're going to be able to make ends meet overall. The notion of being able to go to school while working full-time is something I tried to do and I almost killed myself 20 years ago and now is completely impossible. Something I think people from the generation older than I might not have fully accepted. I know the people in this room are an exception to that because you live this every day. Climate change is a real and firm worry. Access to healthcare, safety on campus, and specifically safety concerns arising from the increase of certain types of speech, like hate speech. And what that looks like is from the year 2021, which is the last year I had data on, saw a 11% increase in hate crime. That's up to 9,000, over 9,000 crimes. 63% were motivated by race, ethnicity, and ancestry. 31% were anti-Black, 10% were anti-white. And since they're not weighted by population, these numbers actually underestimate the rate of hate crimes against minority groups. As of 2022, LGBTQ hate crimes were 20% of the cases, and those on religion were 15.1% of cases, with crimes against Muslim, Jewish, and Sikh topping the list. And hate crimes, unfortunately, are up all across the Midwest, and we've seen a startling 44% increase in Wisconsin in 2020. And you don't have to think too far back of seeing things hit the news about hate crimes on campus and the rise of hate speech. And again, it's worth pointing out that a lot of hate speech and hate crimes go unreported. So if we're going to focus, and I feel like the heart of this, the birth of this idea, the birth of the survey was to make sure we're listening to students and winnowing out those opinions of what they might not otherwise say. Let's listen to what they're actually saying, and rejecting hate speech in the process. And so ensuring that we listen to all of these students, hearing what they have to say. And I think that starts with making it easier for them to vote. So by accepting all forms of ID on campus, not just those that have an arbitrary expiration date. I think that means making sure that we have a reconstitution of shared governance so that students are the ones actually leading the decisions on campus, and not just listening to those that we self-select, but they actually have a seat at the table once again, something that was stripped away through legislation 10 years ago. And as we're discussing free speech and expression, I think it's vital to restore that shared governance to the greater role of addressing each of the campaign concerns. I'd be curious what role students played in constructing efforts on campus related to this report and these student-led initiatives. Are they the concepts of the administration? Free speech and expression live with veracity on our UW campuses. As expression and speech flow freely in our greater society, the question is, what is specifically being done to teach students that their right to free speech and expression is not free from criticism or consequence? What do you think can be done to better prepare students with the knowledge of their rights and responsibilities to others prior to entering into higher education? We should end cancel culture. But I think that starts, frankly, by releasing the $32 million that have been held hostage by the state legislature and allowing faculty and staff the raise that they are more than worthy of.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Nedwesky, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Larson. Senator Larson and I had the privilege earlier this week of debating the campus free speech bill in his committee. So I appreciate some of the reiteration of those points. And what I've learned in this process as a newbie is we mostly agree on this topic. And there's just some little bit of places in between where, you know, there's a difference of some subjective opinion on what is free speech and, you know, what is hate speech and what is harm. I think we had a lot of discussions in the hearings about harm. So like I said, in the committee earlier this week, the Assembly Committee on Colleges and Universities series of informational hearings on intellectual diversity on campuses was the most productive and bipartisan experience I've had so far in session. The committee was very, very respectful of all people testifying, of each other. There was no disrespect that happened. A lot of construction discussion came out of that. A lot of construction discussion, not only about the survey results, but about the testimony, the real life anecdotal experiences of what was happening on campus. And, you know, I'm a data analyst. I've been a financial analyst for 20 years, and I'm driven by the data. So it was really the survey results that inspired me to get involved with working on the legislation, because I saw in the survey, yes, some very good things. I saw there must be something good happening because a lot of students are somewhere in the middle on most of these questions. But that doesn't mean you ignore the responses that are on either end that are extreme, because apparently we have a big commitment to belonging here. So that was not a part of things when I was at UW Parkside in the 90s. The belonging was not a priority. We have a responsibility in our role as well as in your role to continue to try to influence cultural change. And there's nothing we can do through legislative policy or regent policy or even in writing a letter and what you say that is going to change culture immediately. But we do have the opportunity, like Representative Wicke said, to lead by example and to make sure that we are giving that top-down view of how it's supposed to look. You know, whether it's having people from both sides of an argument come and do an event and say, this is how it can happen. You don't have to shut each other down. You don't have to walk out of the room. But I have 17 and 18-year-olds, and one is a freshman here at UW-Madison. And if I'm being totally honest, the feedback hasn't been great so far on this topic. But he's new and he's learning the ropes. It's self-censorship came up a number of times in the hearing and in our informational hearings and in the survey. I don't think that's the biggest problem, but I do know that having worked with the K-12 schools over the last several years, even students at the high school level have a problem with it. And I think during one of our hearings, we heard someone say, for 4 years before they come to college, We tell them, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't say that in a classroom. And then they jump into freshman year, and now we're trying to say, no, you can say whatever, not whatever you want, but you can say that. We want to encourage you to share your ideas. You can question that. I think it's a difficult transition. And, I read the report as well, and listening to the examples given by the chancellors today. Certainly, everyone seems to be making an effort. Is it impactful? How are we measuring that? I mean, there's a lot of money and time and effort going into these efforts, but how do we know it's working? I think that's a question that, as a data analyst, I would want to have an understanding of, because we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Self-censorship and good judgment are not the same thing. You can think of an idea in a classroom or in public or wherever you might be, or in the legislature, and think, oh, I want to say that, but wait, what are the consequences, right? The consequences might be something where you're like, you know what? Maybe it's not the right thing to say at this time. Maybe it is harmful or insensitive, or maybe I need to get more information before I say that out loud. That's good judgment. Self-censorship is being in this case in a classroom and really truly believing that, well, everything that's being said here and everyone's exchanging these ideas and everyone seems to be on the same page but me, I better not open my mouth, because there's going to be a social or even maybe an instructional consequence. And I think that the anecdotal evidence that we heard in the hearings was absolutely illustrative of the fact that there is a problem. And although the reports don't always show that there's a lot of incidences, I would say that a lot of people don't report those incidences. I think we need to, like Jeff said earlier, we need to do a better job with the report and getting people to have an understanding that it exists and that you're allowed to make complaints and bring concerns to the surface. They may or may not be valid, but we have to encourage people to come forward. I had the same concerns in the survey about students' lack of knowledge about the First Amendment. And I think there's no doubt that we need to address that. I know it's happening a little bit in orientations and in freshman distribution of materials. I know there's a lot of email. I mean, I get it all too as a parent, so I'm getting all of the information. Our free speech bill made that a requirement. It said, we would like the universities of Wisconsin and Wisconsin technical colleges to commit to annual education on the First Amendment, whether it's to students and staff. It also said, if you want to get data over time on students' attitudes and staff's attitudes on free speech, that we do the free speech survey, every couple of years to see where we're getting to. It's a way to measure if your programs are working. I was disappointed that we couldn't come to a place where we could get support on that bill to get it across the line. And we worked with Joe Cohen from FIRE, and we worked with Dr. Pfeffer Merrill from the Bipartisan Policy Institute extensively to help crank this bill up to a place where we really felt, and they felt, that it was at the 1 inch line, the 1 inch line. And the thing about legislation is if there aren't consequences, if there aren't penalties for violations, what's the point in having it? So I reached out to a number of people and said, okay, if you don't like the penalties we have in the bill, what should they be? And I read through the reports and I read through all the information that we were given on what the UW is doing, but I don't see anything where it says there's really a severe penalty if somebody makes a severe violation. And in the report, it does talk about formal complaints and students responsible. So any student found responsible a third time is required to be expelled. However, these specific provisions of the policy are not currently in force. Well, what's the point in having the policy then? So, I mean, I really, really do think everyone's doing a fantastic job and has the greatest of intentions. But supporting free speech on campus and freedom of expression and academic freedom is not something that we trade $32 million for. It's not an exchange. we're not going to say, okay, well, we'll give you this much money and then will you support the bill? They're not even related to each other. So, I'm disappointed that we couldn't get the bill across the line this time. But I will say, I recently visited UW Parkside. And it was a big reminder to me, because I'm an alum, how unique UW Parkside is compared to the rest of our campuses. It's not necessarily your traditional college experience. I worked full-time, my 3.5 years there. But it allowed me to do that because there were so many other people doing the same thing. When I was a freshman, I was in class with people in their 30s and 40s and 50s. When I was in my 30s, going for some accounting courses, I was in class with freshmen. It was that kind of diversity was very unique to UW Parkside, where you're always going to get a wide age range, people at different places in their life. Some people needing, well, I had to get a babysitter to come here to class tonight, or I had to call into work because I know I need to be here to take this test. It's just so different from the traditional college experience. And it reminded me that we have to continue to talk to students about what diversity is. It's not just ethnic or cultural or your heritage or whatever you want to call it, or even your identity. We have to say it's about viewpoint diversity. It's about life experience. Everybody's at a different place sometimes. And we're not all on the same page every day. We don't have to be. We don't have to be. And I want to teach kids to be compassionate. I want my kids to be polite and understanding and tolerant, absolutely tolerant. But Chancellor Mnuchin talked about she said, we have to talk about belonging and free speech. They are at times of great tension. And that is the cultural conundrum. Which one gets the priority when they're at tension? If we're in a classroom and there are competing points of view, do we prioritize belonging or do we prioritize free speech? Can they work together? And I think that's where we have a confused generation of young people because they prioritize belonging over speech. I see it every day in my kids and in their peers. It's about how you feel, not what the truth is. And I think that that's something that we need to further investigate. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you very much. I would like to now turn it over to Regents for questions or comments. Yes, Regent Atwell.
Thank you. Maybe I'll be showing my ignorance through this, but I mean it sincerely as a question, or actually 3 questions. I believe I know what hate is. I don't believe I know what hate speech is. And I'm a little leery of who defines what hate speech is. And I guess the questions are, to what extent does the First Amendment prohibit hate speech? Does hate speech have a concrete definition that can be constitutionally understood? And who defines what hate speech is?
Wondering if Eric and Tim could help us navigate that a little bit, professors.
Well, we have some excellent staff from the Office of General Counsel here.
Not to mention a load of attorneys.
I could turn it over to them, but I'll offer my opinion since I'm interim director of WICKED. Hate speech is not a term of the law in the United States. It is a term of the informal term people use. I'm a scholar in this area. I could find you in a Google search in a matter of minutes, 12 different definitions of hate speech. There's no agreed upon definition of hate speech in the law or amongst scholars. There is sometimes said to be an international consensus against hate speech. And that's true at a very vague and broad level. But again, when you look at the actual laws of England or France, you will find there's significant differences in how they define hate speech. So people might think that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's not a term of the law, but that is the state of our constitutional law at this point. Hate speech subjects you to potential legal sanctions when it's part of a true threat. when it becomes part of a pattern of severe and pervasive harassment, if it fits, in other words, one of the other recognized categories of unprotected speech in our constitutional regime.
Okay.
So is that
The
a
judge will
no?
define it.
Are you any more secure in your definition now? Regent
No, I'll
Hall?
take that as a no.
I did want to bring out the representative addressed the need for punishment or a thinking of if you violate the rights of others, that there would be a punishment. And I keep going back and forth on this in the setting that we work in, because we're here and our main purpose is to educate. And sometimes you have to educate over and over and over with this young population who, as several of you pointed out, is probably not necessarily well-versed in the rules surrounding free speech and the responsibilities. So I worry about attaching punishment to that. And someone else mentioned the word grace. I don't know who it was, but I think up to a point, we do owe these young people who we're charged with educating a bit of grace and understanding when something like that pops up. I don't think that's the total and complete answer. This is just me telling you what I wrestle with.
I agree with you 100%. I was meaning to make an analogy between your policy that has apparently has consequences outlined in it that are apparently not being enforced right now. And the, Assembly Bill 553, the free speech on campus bill, has penalties in it for the institution, not for the student. So if an institution were to have 2 violations of that policy in a 5-year period, the suggested penalty that we came up with over many different suggestions and iterations was, well, then that institution would have a 2-year tuition freeze.
Goodness.
Not any punishment on the students, but if we take that out of the bill, there's no teeth to the bill.
Right. And I could just for the sake of argument say the tuition freeze is probably indirectly going to harm other students. So in some sense, you could, because you have, and how many students do we have in the UW system? Many, many. And will we be able to educate them all equally and expect them all to observe behaviors exactly in line? I don't know. When it involves human beings, I don't have a ton of faith that that can be addressed in legislation. Just my thoughts.
I would
Yes.
suggest, Regent Walsh, that based on your reasoning on this, then really no punishment would be possible, because you could make the case that any punishment could be harmful to the campus somehow.
I guess I would define, punishment, and that word makes me a little uncomfortable. I admit it.
It's penalty.
Consequences. Maybe one of the consequences is you get to attend a speech by someone who's going to be on one side and someone who's going to be on the other. I think there are creative ways to enforce these things gently with peer pressure, with an openness in the classroom, which I think we're all committed to. But I see the point you're making.
Your own policy has some sanctions in it.
Mhm.
We don't envision, for instance, in our free speech bill, that this is something that would probably ever happen. I'd say it's very unlikely. Really, the first penalty involved here is that an institution would have to, in their literature, inform students that they have violated free speech policy, that campus has violated free speech. To me, that's like a truth in advertising type of statement. And while it might not be great for the university campus, I think it's good for the people, and I think it's good for the public, and I think it's great for the students to know that.
President Walsh, if I could.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. One of the things I think we need to go back to and remember is we're talking about an education institution. And so the goal in the end is to educate people. I think simply by some of the folks taking this survey, they learned certain things about the First Amendment, looking because there was a couple pieces in the front of the survey about how do you feel for different things, and then kind of A or B, which is true for the First Amendment. And yeah, I've mentioned this a few times in our colleges and universities committee. But I would really be intrigued to see what the people in the legislature understood about the First Amendment. Because after having these robust conversations about the free speech and free expression on campuses at our hearing on transgender athletes at the university, one of our members got very upset and said, I'm tired of people emailing me and calling me transphobic, and that's bullying and that's hate speech, and you can't do that. You can do that. And if that man sat through all of those hearings and did not understand that, we as a legislature do not have a firm understanding of what the First Amendment is. And so I think there's an education piece that needs to start with our body first and foremost, and especially the people on our committee, how anybody could sit through all of those hearings and not understand that people have a right to say something that offends somebody else is beyond my understanding.
I would totally agree with that. I would just go back and say, this is a piece of legislation that's 30 pages long. There's probably about 3 lines of that 30 pages that has to do with penalties. So penalties aren't really the main focus of the bill.
In size or number?
Number.
So President Welsh.
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment on this.
Of course.
Because I think the answer is more towards the exception. I look at the exception. So on your campus, if you tell me, well, this group, it's okay if you disrupt this because you have I side with your opinion and this person is wrong. I look at the first page that Chancellor from Superior put up with the free speech means, I'll let you know where you're wrong and that'll decide it. Yeah. And so I think teaching that there's no exception, I think that's the piece. If you think we can just go along and there's not any consequence even for an 18 or 19-year-old, I think that's wrong. But to say that there's an exception if you believe in this period, you can disrupt things. But well, if you try to disrupt something or if you make this type of statement, we're going to expel you without even a hearing. I think that's the piece that I look at to say if we can't get through that, if we can't, and I think it starts with preventing things before they happen. Okay. So preventing a large group from just taking over and saying, well, you had the right to do that because you have the right to protest against it. Well, if you make arrangements so that your protest has to be a certain number of feet away so that this person can speak, and I don't care what I want to speak. I mean, and I have 30,000 constituents, and if you think that they all agree on the same thing, and if you don't think I get some rather interesting conversations when I talk to people or the opinions that come in, I will meet with anyone. I will go anywhere. I'll sit down with anyone in your university system. I don't care what kind of opinions they have. I think that's the kind of example that we need to show. But once again, I'll challenge us to get to a higher level than just accepting that we have to do the basic, which is to guard.
That's a fair challenge. Thank you. Regent Miller.
Yeah, doesn't our current Board of Regents policy have penalties, and the penalties are you'll be suspended?
General Counsel.
Yeah, the penalties, Regent Miller, they're being referenced, were required to be promulgated by administrative code. Those were submitted about 3 or 4 years ago, made it almost all the way through and did not make it through until final promulgation. So those were the one portion of the policy that were required to be promulgated as an administrative rule. So that's why those are unable to be implemented.
Do the campuses keep track of those violations? I'm wondering, since 2015, I think the Board of Regents had its first policy, and then 2019 it was updated. So there's been 8 years to keep track of this. So how many students have fallen afoul of it?
I wouldn't be able to answer
And would
that
be subject
question.
to your $500 penalty?
Jeff, did you?
They would be, I think there's been 7 that we would count as in incidents since we started reporting in 7 years ago, so.
And I would also, Representative Whitkey, I think most all of our campuses, and correct me if I'm wrong, do keep an eye on speakers that are coming to campus and do work proactively with the police department. I know it's happened here at Madison a number of times with speakers that it was a fair assumption that there might be some issues. So they work with student groups on both sides. The police are present. And actually, the most recent example worked out fairly well. And that's partly because of what, the type of thing you suggested. Yes, Regent Peterson.
Listening to this conversation, I want to give you an old person perspective. I went to the University of Minnesota in the fall of 1969 at the age of 16. And we were in the midst of the biggest protests of the Vietnam War. And it didn't even matter if you didn't know much about the war. It was just the cool thing to do. And this whole problem that we have now with free speech, it's a lot like trying to herd cats. These kids that, are at the universities, you feel so free and so able to and passionate about all these kind of things. And I think we're like trying to herd cats. And I have a dairy farm and we have cats and they're impossible to herd, just like, it's a perspective or context from 50 years ago. And I think this stuff is cyclical. I'm not denying that free speech is super important. And I think it's really good that we're all having this conversation. But it is just, all you have to do is watch the evening news and you get all this stuff all the time. And so I just want to give you that perspective. I do believe it kind of comes and goes, and it's important to acknowledge that none of us are going to really have all the answers.
Yeah. I think Chancellor Mnookin wanted to speak to what I.
Is that, yes, ooh, that was very loud. An example of free speech, I guess. Thank you for the chance to jump in. I want to clarify this, at least from the perspective of my campus. Under our current rules, we can, in fact, and in the right circumstances would have consequences for actions that disrupted university authorized activities, including talks. Currently, under UWS 17.098, something that is subject to student non-academic discipline, non-sexual misconduct cases, is disruption of university authorized activities. Conduct that obstructs or impairs university-run or university-authorized activities, or that interferes with or impedes the ability of a person to participate in university-run or university-authorized activities. So right now, at this point, if a set of actions dramatically impeded somebody's ability to speak, we have the ability to take action. And on my campus, you're actually both right. We are an educational institution, and there are times when punitive action is what is called for, just as with academic misconduct, right? We're an educational institution. Not everybody who plagiarizes really understands the full wrong of what they did. And that's why we don't kind of kick them out once and for all upon a first offense. But that doesn't mean we give them a free pass either. And so in all of these settings, I just want to make clear, we can have a conversation about whether our rules are strong enough or clear enough or should be changed. But right now, we can, and on my campus at least, in some circumstances, if necessary, we would to consider this a form of non-academic misconduct.
Okay, thank you. Other regents? Yes, Regent Rock.
I more of a statement and then maybe a request going forward. The statement is thank you to the 5 of you that came today. I've been a regent for a little over 2 years. This is the most dialogue that I've had the opportunity to be part of between elected officials and appointed regents. I wish I'd have heard this on my first day in orientation. It was great to see the dialogue, to hear the dialogue. Not only as a regent, but a dad of a senior at Eau Claire and a dad of a freshman at UW. and also the presentations from our chancellors. And I guess the request of me as a regent is to have more of this. In all honesty, the level of dialogue, the need for more of it even before a bill that would affect the university would go in front of committee to have the dialogue and the shaping of it, at least with input at the forefront, would have been great. And I really appreciate you all being here. And I look forward to hopefully more of this as a request to, regent and system leadership,
Request
because
noted.
and just we as much as we asked our students to talk more just now, we all need to talk more. So I appreciate it and thank you for being here.
I really appreciate those comments, and I will just say, my office door is always open, and you can come over to our fine house anytime you'd like, and sit down. And I would be glad to engage in more discussions. I fully understand that, and if we're ever going to get solutions to problems, we need to make sure that everybody is rowing in the same direction. I have a sports background, so the most successful teams I'm on never relied on the individual. It was always on everybody doing their part. And so I appreciate the comments. Thank you.
And we will attempt not to fumble as well. I'm a football girl, what can I say? Any other questions or comments by my regent colleagues? Seniors, or anything else anyone who joined us would like to reiterate?
No, it sounds like maybe we've gotten ourselves into something now.
And I think that's a good thing.
I'll be there with a cup of coffee for Representative Wiki. How do you take your latte?
What's that?
Fair enough, fair enough. All right, again, thank you very, very much for taking the time to come down and see us. I'll come by your office anytime you like. Thank you so much. We are going to be moving into closed session. We'll take about a 10-minute break, and then we will take the vote with the board for closed session. Oh, we got to do the vote. Well, we'll do a vote, but I don't have everybody at the table. Regents, please return to the table. We need to vote for closed session. Sadly, there's not a lot. No.
Yeah.
Oh, you're one of those black coffee. Okay, thank you. See you.
Thanks, Representative.
All right,
Right, sounds good.
Vice President Bogus, could you please read the resolution for closed session?
I move that the Board of Regents move into closed session to consider personal histories related to UW Madison, UW Milwaukee, UW Eau Claire honorary degree nominations as permitted by Section 19.85, parent 1, parent F of Wisconsin statutes. Consider a student request for review of a UW Madison disciplinary decision as permitted by Section 19.85, parent 1, parent A, parent F, and parent G of Wisconsin statutes. Confer with legal counsel regarding pending Tony Evers, which is Howard Markline, appeal number 2023-2020, and potential litigation as permitted by Section 19.85, parent 1, parent G of Wisconsin statute. Deliberate, negotiate funding proposals and matters that require a closed session for competitive or bargaining reasons as permitted by Section 19.85, parent 1, parent A of Wisconsin statutes, and consider personnel evaluation of the UW system president as permitted by Section 19.85, parent 1, parent C of Wisconsin statute.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yes, Megan, please call the roll.
Regent President Walsh?
Yes.
Regent Vice President Bogus? Regent Adams?
Yes.
Regent Atwell?
Yes.
Regent Brinkus?
Yes.
Regent Cologne?
Yes.
Regent Jones?
Yes.
Regent Cruiser.
Yes.
Regent Menny-Deeds.
Yes.
Regent Miller.
Yes.
Regent Peterson.
Yes.
Regent Prince.
Yes.
Regent Rye.
Yes.
Regent Staton. Regent Tyler.
Yes.
Regent Underly. Regent Walks.
Yes.
Regent Weatherly.
Yes.
And we'll just wait for the lines to be clear and the doors to close. Stephen, are there any other regents out there? Or we all, everybody that needs to be here is here. Okay, thank you. All right, President Rothman,